Thanks for joining me today. What we're going to do is I'm going to teach you how to make your own wooden fishing lures. Lures that are cheaper to make and better and give you the satisfaction of catching fish on a lure you make yourself. First place to start with is your choice of wood. Now this is hobby wood you can buy at any Lowe's, Home Depot, any type of lumber store is going to have this. This is poplar. This is my favorite to use. It's a hardwood, but it's easy to form, shape, and sand. Pine is usable, but remember, it's a softer wood. It will not hold up as well, especially if you're catching big fish. Okay, what we're going to start with is I've already traced our pattern onto the piece of poplar wood. Again, this is a half-inch piece of poplar. We're going to cut this out. Now you can use either, I've got a scroll saw. I cut a lot of lures, so a scroll saw I can justify that expense. Not a very expensive one. I think it cost about $70. If you're going to make a lot of lures, a scroll saw it's easier to use. But you can cut this out using any jigsaw, or even with a cutting attachment, you can use a Dremel to cut this out. So it's not necessary to have a scroll saw. We're going to cut this out. Okay, what we're going to use here is a Dremel with a sanding bit on it, and that's what we're going to use to shape our lure. Now remember, you always want to wear your safety glasses whenever you're either cutting the wood or you're sanding the wood with a Dremel, because you're going to throw shavings all over the place. So I'm going to kick this thing on and let's get started. You'll notice when you're using the Dremel, think of it as you're whittling. You do not want to take off a lot. You want to take off a little bit at a time and slowly turn the lure as you're sanding it down to give you the shape that when the end should look like that. Okay, now we're to a point in time where we can go ahead and use a power sander for a little bit, get it a little more smoother, take a little bit more off, and then we'll get down to final sanding. Okay, now that we've used the Dremel, and we've got it to our pretty much a shape that we're ready to do some fine sanding to. And what you want to remember when you're doing this is that you don't need to have a sander to do this, but most people have one in their home. I put this Biltzer, this palm sander, right there between my knees, turn it on, and I'm going to slowly run this thing to start smoothing it out, and I'm going to turn it as I do it so that I still maintain the edges rounded off. You do not want your lure to have any, too many, squared edges. So let's get this started and see what it looks like. Now we've got that ready to where we can just use regular 100 grit sandpaper and make sure it's nice and smooth and do the final work. Okay, now we're just taking a piece of 100 grit sandpaper and we're just doing our final sanding on this, and we're using this to shape over any areas that maybe are a little bit on the high side. Take a look at your lure and turn it. Make sure that your edges are rounded. Pay close attention to the front of the lure. Now this is pretty self-explanatory. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this. Obviously, you want the back end of your lure to be thinner than the front end of your lure. That way, if you're doing a solid lure, you're going to be able to get some action. Remember, the action from your lure is going to come from the size of the lip, diving lip that you're using, as well as the shape of the lure toward the back, are the two primary reasons. So, it looks like we're just about ready to call this one finished. Okay, now before you paint, what you need to consider is what type of a fishing lure are you building? Are you building a floater or are you building a diving lure? And what type of lip you're going to use. This is a lure I fished pretty hard with, and it's got a metal diving lip. This is the easiest for a beginner to do. Buy the diving lip from any number of places. Cabela sells them. Jan's Netcraft is another great source for lure building parts. It's got 2 screws right here that are put in, and here's what the diving lip looks like. What you're going to want to do though is you're going to want to mark your lure before you start your painting process as to where you're going to want the screw holes to be. Not only the holes for the diving lip, but also your holes front, back, and in the middle for your hook hangers. Okay, before you get ready to paint, you have 2 choices to make. The easiest choice is to use what's called a dipping method, and this is a lure that's been dipped. Dipping gives you a nice surface that you can paint to. It's kind of like primer. And what you'll just do is you'll put a screw eye in the end. You'll take, and you can go to any home improvement store and get a half gallon or a gallon. A gallon will last you forever, trust me, of paint, interior, exterior, and enamel. Take the lure, dip it into the can, pull it out of the can, and hang it, letting the paint run down. It'll fill any imperfections in the wood, and that'll give you a nice surface to paint on. That's called a dipping method. This particular lure wasn't dipped. This particular lure I used what's called a foil method. And as you can see, the foil method gives it an incredible look to it as far as the scale pattern. The foil method is described in my book. It's easy to do. I heartily suggest that you try the foil method because I believe it gives a superior look to your lures. This method, easier. This method, not necessarily any harder, but you'll like the results better. This is an example of the foil technique. And this particular lure only has black paint, the aluminum underneath that, and the hardware. As you can see, you get an incredible shimmer off of it, as well as a real 3D effect by the technique. So, this particular lure, this one's been dipped. We're going to talk a little bit about painting it real quickly. You can use to paint your lure. You can use regular model paints if you'd like. You can use automotive spray paint, or if you're going to do a lot of lures, I would recommend that you buy an inexpensive airbrush. This particular airbrush, it's the only one I've ever had. I'd never airbrushed before. I taught myself to do it, and trust me, if I can learn to do it, you can learn to do it. This airbrush is about $39. The compressor, I want to say, was about 60 bucks. They'll last me forever. This will give you a much better finish. If you're painting a lure that's one solid color and you don't want to spend a lot of money, then the other 2 methods that I described are perfectly acceptable, because as long as you take your time, it's gonna turn out well. If you're going to airbrush paint, however, it's going to give you the ability to use this hoop that has what I would call wedding veil material, and it's going to allow you to put that against the lure, and as you spray, create your scale patterns. An airbrush is also going to give you the ability to put on either a lot or very little and give you much finer work for your lures. Okay, to put your final coating on your lure, I recommend that you use, again, what's called DevCon 2-ton epoxy. 2-part epoxy, pretty easy to use, gives you 30 minutes to work with it. And what you're going to do is, again, this is all done before you have your hardware on the lure. But you're going to take the epoxy, make sure it's mixed up thoroughly. If you don't have your ratios correct, it's a 1-to-1, you're going to have spots that are going to not cure properly. So mix it up well, take a paintbrush, small paintbrush, and spread it on like you would a paint. Being careful to get it nice and evenly coated. That's what you're going to do. Now, a couple things with DevCon is, number 1, don't try to apply too much. Multiple coats is what you want. At least 2, and you want to wait 24 hours between coats. You don't want to put on your epoxy any sooner than a full day after you've done painting. And if you're using a heavier paint, give it even more time. Okay, the other thing is when it gets coated, is take your lure This one obviously hasn't been painted, but take it and rotate it as it's drying a little bit. And I would say you're gonna, figure that you're gonna maybe be watching TV, and for 30 minutes, do that so that you don't get any runs in it, and so that the coating is evenly done. Again, minimum of 2. Okay, a couple of quick tips here. Number 1, when you're putting your hardware on, make sure that your hardware is lined up in a straight line. This will help your lure run straight, which is something that you probably want. The other thing is, if you're doing a jointed lure like this one, make sure that the joints match up, that you're not too far to one side or the other. So when you're putting your hardware in, make sure that they're straight. Okay, a couple of other things. Number 1, don't rush your work. Not important necessarily to be fast at all. It's important to be happy with what you're doing. Your first lure with my book will not look like my first. This ugly mutt is the first lure I ever made, and I guarantee you with my book you will not suffer the indignity of having this in your tackle box. This is the lure we're going to try in the lake later. Same perch pattern, vastly different design. This is the book. It's on CD. If you want the CD version, you'll need to go ahead and get on my Facebook, and I'll tell you how to get the book or how to get the CD sent to you. The cost is $6.99 plus $5 shipping and handling. Or you can get the book faster by linking onto my eBay page. It's listed here in the video. And that, when you buy that, it's $6.99, and the book is emailed to you. So you can get started making your lures right away. And lastly, if you buy the book, you've got my email address. If you've got any questions, I'm here to help. Let's go to the lake and try out that lure. Okay, we're here at our favorite honey hole. We're going to try out our little ultralight jointed perch pattern that we've made.
He was a fighter though, wasn't he?
Tough guy.
Yeah. That's Rudy right there.
Is that Rudy?
That's Rudy.
What I lack in size.
Tough little guy. You're still here? How come you're not out making lures, catching fish? Let's go!